We must keep in mind, dear students, that the social security system is in the grip of a deep crisis. And this crisis is of a twofold nature. On one hand, it is a technical crisis, and we will see what it consists of in a moment. On the other hand, it is an ethical crisis. In fact, the technical and the ethical aspects go hand in hand. They are closely related. We will see that technical deficiencies cause grave injustices, and that the erroneous concept of social justice, on which Social Security rests, makes the technical crisis inevitable. What does the technical crisis of Social Security involve? Well, basically, it involves the system by which Social Security is financed. This system is called, please take good note, a pay-as-you-go financing system. In terms of Social Security technique, what is a pay-as-you-go financing system? Well, it is one in which benefits, that is, retirement, widowhood and orphan pensions, are paid each year out of the Social Security contributions received either from people who are working or from their employers. In a pay-as-you-go system, current benefits are paid out of the revenue for the current year. You need to understand that this has some extremely significant economic effects. First, the pay-as-you-go Social Security system acts as a false substitute for individual saving. If citizens believe that when they retire, those who are working will pay their benefits just as they are now doing for their own elders, citizens will see saving as unnecessary. This is true to the extent that citizens expect the pay-as-you-go method to continue in use and to be sustainable generation after generation. However, in practice it is not. Among other reasons, because the negative impact on saving means that economic growth is much lower than it could actually be. There are economic studies which show that those countries with the most developed pay-as-you-go Social Security systems have a significantly lower savings rate than those countries without Social Security systems, or with systems of much more limited scope. And this detrimental effect on saving also plays a key role in making economic cycles worse. As we already know, crises and recessions spring from a shortage of saving. They arise when too much is consumed and too little is saved. Thus, a recession and a crisis are felt much more strongly in Spain, apart from other reasons due to the great rigidity of the labor market. Traditionally, very little has been saved in Spain, since the Social Security system is financed using the pay-as-you-go method. In addition to this effect on saving, there is a second, far more problematic effect, and it has to do with biometrics, actuarial biometrics if you will. As you will all understand, if contributions are taken from current workers and immediately used to pay the pensions of retirees, then if there is a gradual aging of the population, this so-called intergenerational solidarity, which supposedly rests on the working generation's support of the retired generation, is thrown into crisis. If something characterizes economic development, it is that it raises life expectancy. Improvements in healthcare, for instance, greatly increase the average age of death. According to recent Spanish mortality tables, out of every 5 women who reach the age of 65, 20%, lives to be 100 years old. Economic development is also characterized by a slowing of the birth rate. People marry later. They are more selective when it comes to having children. They take better care of them, and so on. On the one hand, the birth rate is slowing. On the other hand, people are living longer and longer. The average age of death is tending to rise. We are witnessing what is referred to as a gradual aging of the population. The percentage of the population over the age of 65 is getting larger and larger. To give you an idea, when General Franco established the pay-as-you-go Social Security system in Spain in 1964, there was 1 retiree for every 6 active workers. Today, the ratio is 1 retiree to every 2 active workers. In other words, because the population is gradually aging as an inevitable result of economic development, the cost of supporting the retired generation using the pay-as-you-go system snowballs. And invariably, this phenomenon has been observed in all countries with Bismarck-type continental European social security systems. which are based on the pay-as-you-go method. The first such system was established in 19th century Germany by Bismarck, the Iron Chancellor, and it later perversely spread to the rest of the countries, at least those of continental Europe. There is a third significant technical consideration, namely that from the standpoint of economic theory, the total amount contributed to Social Security, that is, not only what the worker nominally pays, but also every last euro an employer pays for a worker, is paid entirely by the worker. The worker pays it because it is part of the worker's total labor cost to the employer. Instead of paying 27 or 28% of each salary into the Social Security system, as the employer is doing now, he or she would not mind giving it directly to the worker and saying, "Listen, here is your money. Do whatever you want with it and fend for yourself." It would certainly be a giant step toward reform, and in the right direction, if in Spain, for instance, all wages were expressed in gross terms. That way, workers would know that with the contribution made to Social Security by their employers, workers are actually earning 50% more than they are being told. There would be a huge outcry for reform, because people would do their calculations and say, "Listen, between the 27% of my wages and the 6%, we are talking about a third. 1/3 of all I earn is going to Social Security. Give it to me directly. I have made my calculations, and there is enough for me to pay Sanitas for private healthcare insurance for my whole family. I can also take out retirement insurance or a pension plan. And if I start working at the age of 25 or 30, by 65 I may have accumulated €1 million and secured for myself a much higher pension than the one politicians are promising I will receive from the public pay-as-you-go system. In fact, politicians are not in a position to fulfill that promise, and when the time comes, they will pay me a fraction of what they have promised, and only if the circumstances are favorable. Now we will comment on the ethical problems which Social Security poses, and which, as we will see, go hand in hand with the technical inadequacies we have just mentioned. The first ethical problem I would like to point out is the following. The pay-as-you-go financing system is clearly unjust because it offers no guarantee. In other words, Social Security provides no security. It is not an insurance policy. If it were, having paid would give me a right to something. With Social Security, you have no right to anything. Most citizens are unaware of this. They do not realize that everything they have paid in contributions has already been spent in the year, and that therefore the payment of pensions in the future, when we retire, will depend on political circumstances in the future. It will depend on uncertain economic prospects 20 or 30 years from now, and at that time, our having contributed to the system will be completely irrelevant. Therefore, Social Security certainly provides no security. If the number of years used to calculate our pensions is increased, and our pensions are reduced, as has happened many times in the past, as it stands now, no one can file a lawsuit in the courts and say, "Listen, I was promised this and that." You will be able to do that if you take out retirement insurance via a private contract, and the company fails to honor its commitments. However, there is no type of contract that can be enforced in any court because politicians change the conditions and announce they are going to reduce pensions. When pensions are cut, it is always done more or less euphemistically, more or less secretly. For instance, by changing the number of years used to calculate the average that will determine the pension you will be entitled to. If the number of years is increased, and instead of 10 years, 15, 20 or 25 years are used, and in the earliest years your wages were lower, then that is a way of reducing your pension. Another way is to say, as politicians have recently said, "Listen, instead of retiring at 65, you will be able to retire at 70. Any combination of these methods may be used." There is a second grave ethical problem, and that is the extremely doubtful ethical legitimacy of placing on the shoulders of our children the increasing and intolerable burden of maintaining our pensions in the future. How can we, without asking for their consent, transfer to our children an increasing financial burden that is becoming intolerable? It should not surprise us to see them rebel if, in the future, each active worker must support one retiree, or a retiree and a half, and the responsibility becomes intolerable. Our children may well have a right to refuse. No one asked them if they agreed in the first place. The current system generates unnecessary and insoluble conflicts and tensions between the different generations. Either the commitments will be met, and young people who are working will be economically stifled as a result, or they will rebel and say, "No, we are not going to meet those commitments. We are going to reduce your pensions." Ultimately, it is a zero-sum game, in which some people win, others lose, and insoluble conflicts are all that is created. This is one of the greatest sources of potential social unrest in modern societies, and it is all due to the fact that the system technically rests on the erroneous pay-as-you-go method and a lack of capital accumulation. There is a third important ethical problem, and it is also mentioned in the reading. Specifically, I do not consider it ethical to curtail people's liberty, that is, to deprive entrepreneurs and workers of the freedom to set up whatever social security system they find most suitable. And I consider it particularly immoral to treat workers like small children who cannot do whatever they want with their money. As we have already seen, a very large part, more than a third, of all they earn goes to Social Security. Why not let workers have that money and decide for themselves how to finance their retirement and cover their healthcare risk? It comes as no surprise that Social Security was established by General Franco and devised by Bismarck. It is based on a fascist, paternalistic system. Social Security rests on an antiquated paternalism that is incompatible with true democracy and free, responsible citizens. Social Security is based on an astonishing paradox whose continued existence well into the 21st century is hard to believe. The paradox is that public affairs are managed according to the will of voters, but later the very legislator considers these voters incapable of managing their own affairs, of arranging and financing with their own money the system of retirement and healthcare coverage they find most suitable. And let no one argue that if we were given that third of our salary, some people, due to a lack of foresight or bad luck, might not take out healthcare insurance or might reach retirement age without any savings. That is as absurd as saying, listen, if we allow everyone to take care of his or her own lunch and people work it out as they wish, when the end of the day comes, some people will not have eaten. Some will eat at Yuppie. Others will go to Zalakain. Others will eat here at the university. Still others will go home to eat. Others will have brought a sandwich with them. And there may be some people who, due to a lack of foresight or bad luck, have not eaten. I have a solution. We will oblige all citizens to go to a mess hall and eat the same slop at the same time. That way we will be sure that the minority of people who, owing to a lack of foresight or bad luck, cannot satisfy their need to eat will also have that need met. If someone presented such a plan to any of us, we would realize that it is crazy and absurd. However, in the area of Social Security, that is how the reasoning goes and how things are done. Under the pretext of protecting a minority of the population who, due to a lack of foresight or bad luck, may fail to take out healthcare or retirement insurance, all citizens are obliged, manu militari, to go to a mess hall. That is, to participate in a coercive Social Security system in which over a third of all our earnings are taken from us, and we are rigidly forced to retire at a certain age, and to receive pensions which are determined politically and have nothing to do with our actual contributions. This brings us to the fourth problem. The public system is very rigid, and it seriously harms the chances older people have for personal and professional development. We have all had grandparents, and we know how traumatic retirement can be for many of them. In a free system, a broad range of retirement plans would be agreed upon, including partial retirement, which would allow people to continue working and contributing to the production process. Nowadays, if you retire and then engage in a professional activity, you are a criminal. Your pension is taken away, and you are put in jail. But why? Are you aware of the enormous human potential, especially now that we are living longer and longer, that is being wasted due to mandatory retirement in rigid systems. People are forced to retire. Presumably there are different ages at which, for whatever reason, people would freely choose to retire. Some people would wish to work their whole lives, while others would prefer to work part-time. There are a wide spectrum of combinations that are prevented by the current public social security system, which is rigid and inhumane, and uses a one-size-fits-all approach. The conclusion we reach, dear students, is that social security is a schizophrenic system which contains an inherent contradiction, since it is designed to achieve two mutually incompatible goals. The goal of individual equity is an attempt to somehow establish a connection between the contributions a person makes and the benefits he or she receives. And in order to fool citizens, that is how the system is presented. Though, as we have already seen, there are no guarantees when the time comes to draw a pension. This goal of individual equity is similar in a way to a principle that operates in the private insurance sector based on private contracts, and the attempt is made to reconcile this principle with that of social equity. Social equity is the principle of social justice, and it is based on providing benefits to the most needy, regardless of the contributions they have made. Well, the fact that the same pay-as-you-go institution coercively pursues both of these objectives, which are fundamentally incompatible, means that Social Security never provides any security. For, as we have just observed, there is no guarantee that 10 or 20 years from now we will actually receive the amount we have been promised today. There is no guarantee. Hence, there is no security. There is no individual equity. However, Social Security is not social either. The reception of benefits is made to depend on current contributions paid, and therefore many young people in difficult situations are contributing a third of their wages, an astronomical amount considering the little they earn. And that money is going to pay the pensions of millionaires. And I have nothing against millionaires. But I do have something against a rigid, one-size-fits-all public system which is designed to attain the best of both worlds, but which actually frustrates the attainment of these goals. Never forget, dear students, that Social Security is neither social nor security. It offers no guarantee of receiving benefits, nor can the system meet its objectives of social equity. And regardless of the Toledo Pacts of silence, and even if politicians try to seal their lips, we have no choice but to reform the Social Security system. The sooner the better. The longer we wait to reform the system, the greater the difficulties, conflict, violence and cost will be. And you may ask, why do we not have statesmen explaining this to us? We have discussed this already, and statesmen who explained this would lose the election. You probably do not remember it, but there was a very famous TV debate between Felipe Gonzalez and Jose Maria Aznar, in which, with great cunning and skill, Gonzalez blurted out at Aznar, "What you intend to do is to cut," and he gave a number, 8,221 pesetas from retirement pensions. When he said 8,221, he seemed to be calculating, but he had made it up. Aznar lost the election. All the retirees voted for Felipe Gonzalez, and you can be sure that the same thing would happen today. The public choice school tells us why this cannot be the object of democratic debate, because anyone who explained the situation like a statesman would lose the election. But that makes no difference to me, because we are at a university, and we are here to study problems scientifically. It is impossible to conceive of any serious social security reform that does not rest on the basic principle of separating the two goals of individual equity and social equity and pursuing them via different institutions. The goal of individual equity must be pursued through the customary institutions of private insurance policies and savings based on capital accumulation. The goal of social equity, of helping the needy, who, for whatever reason, reach retirement age without means or lack sufficient healthcare coverage, will have to be achieved by way of freely given charity, and as a secondary measure, if worst comes to worst, a system of social assistance to those needy people who can demonstrate their need. But the two objectives must be separated. And a system based on capital accumulation and saving through private insurance is a system which would avoid all of the technical and ethical problems I have just commented on. If I save for my retirement, there is no longer a pay-as-you-go financing system. There is savings accumulation. Not only is this method not detrimental to societal saving, but it actually encourages saving. Those countries that have adopted pension systems based on capital accumulation, voluntary saving, retirement insurance, and pension plans, like the UK, Chile, and other countries, have greatly boosted their saving rate and are much more prosperous. If, in addition, everyone saves for retirement, the biometrics problem disappears. In fact, a longer life expectancy has a positive effect. If I am going to live longer, I am going to accumulate more, and I will have a larger pension for when I retire. All of the problems that stem from one generation supporting the other are avoided. There is no longer any injustice. Young people do not support older people, since people support themselves, based on the effort they have made to save throughout their lives. Of course, the transition does pose a problem. Even if the political decision is made, and it has been in some countries, to move from a public system to a private system, one generation is faced with a problem, namely that we must begin saving to accumulate the funds for when we young people retire. Nevertheless, we must continue to support current retirees while they are still with us. The generation that is active when the reform is adopted must pay twice. Also, there was a doubt about whether people would be willing to do it. Well, in all the countries in which this option has been offered, people have shown themselves willing to make the effort. The United Kingdom offered the option first, as the result of a pact between the two major political parties, the party on the left and the one on the right, the Labour Party and the Conservative Party. In the 1970s, the first step was taken in the reform of the public system, and contracting out was permitted. People were allowed to contract private pension plans outside the public system. Those who chose to contract out were obliged to continue paying 10% of their wages into the public system for the support of people who were already retired, and funds could be set up using only the money left over. Well, the option was offered. It might have failed. The vast majority of people might have said, "I am not willing to do that." Do you know what percentage of British workers decided to leave the public system? Over 95%. And the same was true in Chile and elsewhere. I am sure that if the option were offered in Spain and people did their calculations, the vast majority of workers would take it. In fact, we do have what may be a rather illustrative sample in the specific area of healthcare, and this is less problematic because it involves the competitive provision of services. In the specific area of healthcare, there are 2 million privileged people in Spain who can choose to leave the public system and go to the private system. Do you know who those 2 million privileged people are? Civil servants, and I am one of them. Civil servants belong to MoveFace, and MoveFace allows us to choose between the public and private healthcare systems. Do you know what percentage of civil servants have left the public healthcare system and have gone to the private system? Almost 90%. I ask you, is it not a glaring injustice that civil servants can do that, but the rest of the Spanish people cannot? It is an absolute outrage. Why can the rest of the Spanish people not do the same? No, the rest of the Spanish people are stuck in the public system. Furthermore, many of them, 4 million, are paying twice, because they are also paying for a private policy in Adeslas, Sanitas, or another of the private healthcare companies. So, think about the duplication of effort and the absurdity of the situation. And let us not talk about Obamacare, which is a joke. People were saying, there are 325 million people living in the United States, and 45 million of them have no health care. Do you know what Obama's reform plan consists of? It consists simply of forcing insurance companies to accept at a certain premium even people with disabilities, and in exchange, the 45 million uninsured people are forcibly compelled to take out insurance, and anyone who does not purchase coverage has to pay a heavy fine. Well, the 45 million uninsured people said that was unconstitutional, and they would take it to the US Supreme Court. We are not talking about 45 million destitute people. Do not believe that. The poor and the elderly in the United States have always had public health care coverage through Medicaid and Medicare. The 45 million people who have no private insurance do not want any private insurance. And the proof of that lies in the fact that when they were forced to join the system, they did nothing but complain, and they took the matter to the Supreme Court. They argue that it is an offense against individual liberty to force someone to buy something he or she does not wish to buy. As always, demagogy instead of rational analysis.